So what is the big question here? Like, how do we know what's going to happen?
The $1 million question really is, will Trump cave? Will he back down?
Isn't it like $1 trillion question at this point?
When you put it that way, I guess it's really like an $8 trillion question.
Oh my gosh, it's so much money on the line.
Look what happened. Is this crazy? We stand on the verge of the 4 greatest years in the history of Make America Great Again. How can you be against it?
We're watching the markets, which plummeted, now rebounding a bit amid President Trump's trade war. We're watching small business owners prepare for major disruptions in supplies and uncertainty. We're waiting to see if and how much prices go up for consumers. And it seems like really no one knows what's going to happen next, not in America or around the globe, except perhaps President Trump. Hard to say. Welcome to Sidebar from the Washington Post. I'm Libby Casey, along with Rhonda, Colvin, and James Hohmann, my colleagues here at the Post. Today's episode is really about conflict with other countries around the world over Trump's upending of global trade markets, conflict here at home, even within the team working inside and outside the White House with President Trump to figure out next steps. And with great sympathy to our wonderful producers, we don't even know how much will change between the time that we tape this, 1 o'clock on Tuesday afternoon, and the time that you hear this, because it is such a volatile situation. Later on this episode of Sidebar, we'll talk about a huge development in the way the United States will enforce laws surrounding cryptocurrency. But let's dive into where things are at here on Tuesday afternoon. So James, the markets are actually slightly up for the first time in a few days after really devastating losses. Do we know why? What is making the market jump around today?
Trump is signaling a willingness to talk. I think that they're eager to convey that more than 70 countries have now reached out to the U.S. wanting to—
They? Who is they?
The administration. Okay. So the president, the Treasury Secretary, the White House press secretary, they're trying to signal a willingness to look for off-ramps. That doesn't mean they're taking them, but they're trying to reassure the markets that they're willing to talk to South Korea. For example, Trump saying on Truth Social that a South Korea delegation is on the way after he talked to the new South Korean president, and that they want to negotiate. So that is one of the reasons investors are saying, okay, it's not going to be as bad as it looked, because Trump is going to have all these side deals, because for a couple of days he was saying there won't be negotiations, there won't be side deals. And now it's clear that there will be. So
Trump met in the Oval Office with the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, on Monday afternoon, Rhonda. And as they talked to the gathered press, Netanyahu was like, yep, we're making a lot of concessions. We're giving Trump what he wants. And then the reporters turned to Trump and they were like, are you going to pull back from the 17% tariff you're putting on Israel? And Trump really wouldn't answer. Like, I didn't get a clear sense of if Israel is getting anything in return. What are countries and business leaders hoping to get at this moment?
Yeah, and at that press availability yesterday, I was somewhat stunned when a reporter asked Trump, are you going to at least consider a pause on this? And he said, no, but I will consider negotiations. So it still seems like he's doubling down on this. He's not lifting. But I think from what we've heard from the administration, at least when they say there are countries trying to call and trying to have meetings and trying to negotiate the tariffs, and that is a signal that this is all working, I think that that is at least the picture that the White House wants to portray right now, that this is working because we're getting all of these calls, and that little bit of pain that Trump keeps forecasting, it'll be gone soon because countries want to come to the table now. So we'll see if all of that is true. But I think he wants to make sure to show, because this is sort of a PR nightmare for the White House if you look at it that way. It's really hard to sell these tariffs when people are very fearful that their prices are going to go up. So I think they're just trying to right now save a little bit of face and say, look, we've got people wanting to come to the table.
I mean, chances of a recession now, economists are saying are going up. We are trying to get indications, James, of just what these moves will mean on so many different levels, right? On the level of the consumer, right? Prices going up. For small business owners trying to figure out how they get goods out of ports where suddenly their tariffs are being slapped on, something that might have cost them $100,000 now might cost $200,000 just to get in their hands to make their product or sell their product. We're also trying to figure out what it means for like the US economy. What are the tea leaves to be read right now? What can investors and business owners actually look at to try to understand what's happening?
Intentionally or unintentionally, Trump has frozen the American economy, because when you have this level of uncertainty that we're talking about, you don't make big decisions. Think about it. If you're a family, it'd be pretty brave right now to book an expensive summer trip, not knowing how things are going to play out. If you're a business trying to decide whether to open a plant, you don't know what the tariffs are going to be next week or next month or next year, so you can't make business decisions. And if you're a small business, you have a lot less leverage to sort of drive a hard bargain with your suppliers, and you have less of an ability to absorb cost increases. So one of the things that's happening is junk bonds are really moving a lot, because the markets expect that small companies are going to start defaulting on their debt because they won't be able to afford higher prices. The indicator that is especially interesting is the so-called volatility index, the CBOE, and that is moving all over the place. And what it reflects is that people expect the volatility to continue. So maybe the market ends up a little bit today, but people are expecting a lot more sort of wild gyrations as Trump essentially, if he does what he's sort of suggesting he might do, engages in bilateral negotiations with more than 70 different countries, cutting different deals. You know, what's going to happen to Vietnam versus Indonesia versus Thailand, and different companies have exposure to different countries. And so all of that uncertainty just freezes people in place.
You know, I'm noticing that world leaders are having really different reactions, Rhonda. Like some are coming out with a really muscular punchback. I'm thinking China. I'm thinking how Canada was reacting earlier. And others are taking a wait and see approach. And it's we don't really know which approach will work best at this point. Let's talk about what China's doing, right? So China punched back, and now we're punching back. We're
counterpunching. Yeah.
Is that what it's called? A counterpunch? I should get mine.
Yeah, boxing.
Punching back. Yeah. Okay. So that's one approach, right, James? But we're talking about massive tariffs. Break down the numbers for us.
Well, in some cases, if the current escalation took effect, certain products would be tariffed at more than 100% of their cost. Interestingly, China so far has held off on some of the biggest sort of weapons in their arsenal of things that they really could do to grind the U.S. economy to a complete halt, because both sides realize that they lose as this escalates. And so they want to figure out a way to cut some kind of deal, but China is playing hardball, partly because it's big enough that it can. Smaller countries aren't able to as much. The other big distinction I've noticed in talking to people is that the Asian countries besides China are all desperate to get here, get in the room with Trump. The European countries less so, partly because they see this as more of like the whole relationship is on the table, not just the economics, but also the military. And so they're a little more standoffish, but for the most part, countries are, especially the smaller countries, are taking a wait and see approach.
Rhonda, you were on Capitol Hill this morning. Let's talk about how Congress is reacting to this. First of all, give us the vibe check, and then we'll talk about nuts and bolts of what, if anything, members are doing.
Well, big picture, if our listeners and viewers are feeling uncertain, we're talking about all the uncertainty with the markets. Your members of Congress are also pretty uncertain, and that was the vibe that I got this morning. We were in front of a hearing room where the U.S. Trade Representative was a witness in front of the Senate Finance Committee. And we were catching Republican senators, as they were going into that meeting. And many of them said, we're concerned. And we're concerned because our constituents are calling and saying they are concerned, and no one knows the end game. One Republican told us that he doesn't know the end game with President Trump. He doesn't know where this goes. Another Republican, Tom Tillis, he said that in that hearing, he wanted to ask a lot of hard questions because he's trying to figure out what's the end game here. So I don't know if that's any consolation for people, but members of Congress don't know what to do with this either.
But they have power.
They do have more power
more than you and
than us who are, making our grocery list and our, shopping list and wondering what prices we're going to be paying. One power they do have, and this is what's on the table right now, is the Senate is considering a bill that would limit a president's authority over unilateral tariffs, where he or she could impose tariffs in a way that they are the only ones doing it and not involving Congress. So they are trying to tighten up the tariff laws and strengthen what laws there are on tariffs to allow themselves some input if a president ever wants to do this. There have been a handful of Senate Republicans who say, okay, well, we're for this. So even if it does pass the Senate, you also have the question of the House. And the House Republicans are often more loyal to Trump and would not even try to go up against him on this. So we don't know where that bill will go.
And then we've also promising a veto on that.
That's the third layer of this. Okay. Trump has promised that if Congress does pass a bill that would limit his authority on tariffs, that he will veto it. So that's, how a bill becomes a law, how it's vetoed. That's the shape of things right now.
And that means that even more Republicans would have to jump on board to vote for it to overcome a presidential veto. But Rhonda, is even him sending the signal of I'd veto this a chilling effect? Like, did it kind of pop people back in line a little bit?
I think it has, but I also think, especially when you look at senators who are seeking reelection, and some of the Republican senators who haven't really been quiet, I don't think that they are curbing their comments because they feel they have to go up against him or will go up against him. I think what's really driving their response, the genuine responses that we're getting, is the concern from constituents. Like I said, it's a really hard sell for people back home to understand why things are going up when this is not in response to a war. This is not in response to any sort of national security issue. This is just a president deciding that he wants to do these widespread tariffs. So it's hard for them to go back to their district or take these calls when that you just can't explain this and why the U.S. is going through this. So we'll see where this goes. I will say that there have been two Republicans, Rand Paul as well as Ted Cruz, who have been very, very clear that they think that this is problematic. Ted Cruz said that he thinks it's going to be a bloodbath if there is continued fallout from the tariffs or if we're in a global recession during the time.
A political bloodbath?
Political, okay. Yes. Mm-hmm. During the time of midterms, when the midterm election season starts. And Ted Cruz is not running for re-election. So you do have Republicans who
will eventually someday probably, but not this cycle.
I think he has 5 more years on his seat.
When I asked about the bloodbath, I didn't want to imply he meant a literal, but I was wondering if he was thinking politics or if he was thinking a financial bloodbath, right? Like, are the lawmakers thinking in terms of dollars and cents for the American economy? Are they thinking in terms of small businesses, their constituents, and their pocketbooks? Are they thinking in terms of politics? And I know it's all intertwined.
And I think they're going to have to. They're hearing from everyone. Everyone is freaking out. They're terrified of Donald Trump. He is as popular as he's ever been among Republicans. One of the really interesting moments during this hearing with Jamison Greer, the U.S. Trade Representative, was James Lankford, very conservative Republican senator from Oklahoma, said, look, one of the small business people in my state, he moved his production from China to Vietnam because that's what the Trump administration wanted them to do. In the first term, it was sort of like, we need to be less dependent on China. And now Trump put a 45% tariff on products from Vietnam. And so Lankford said, what am I supposed to tell my constituent? He actually did what the Trump people wanted him to do. And so I think as you hear more and more stories like that, as members start to feel the pain and businesses like that, frankly, go under, there will be a political backlash. I think right now it's mostly behind the scenes. But if you really do start seeing real disaster, especially in places that are super dependent on exports, and especially in places, agriculture is very, very vulnerable. You think about a state like South Dakota.
Explain why.
So, South Dakota grows a lot of soybeans. We actually, it's like 60% of the soybeans that South Dakota grows are exported outside the United States. The biggest market for soybeans is China. So if China blocks soybean imports and they just start getting them from Brazil instead of South Dakota, it's going to really hurt the farmers in this small state where the Senate Majority Leader is from. So you already have talk on Capitol Hill about a big bailout for farmers, which is what they did in the first term to make whole people who got hurt by Trump's first trade war, which was comparatively tiny to what he's doing now. And so I think there's like one reason Republicans don't want to get crosswise with the White House is they want to make sure that their constituents are made whole and aren't left out to dry. But it means that Congress, frankly, is, for now, abdicating its constitutional role. The Constitution is very clear that Congress is supposed to set tariffs. And frankly, when you read the Declaration of Independence and the stuff that we rebelled against King George for, setting tariffs, closing markets where Americans, colonists couldn't sell their goods. They had to sell them to Great Britain. They couldn't sell them directly to other countries. Those were central causes of the revolution. And Donald Trump forgets that at his peril, or doesn't know that at his own peril.
And I will add to that, it is sort of a modern construct when it comes to Congress ceding its control over tariffs to the president, because it was decided that presidents could, in times of war, which is the reason Trump is at least applying these to Canada and Mexico, is under his powers to be able to impose tariffs in war times. So yes, you are correct. The Constitution is clear that Congress has control of tariffs, but in recent times, it has allowed the executive branch to go ahead and lead the way on tariffs if it's necessary. I'll also say this, too, about what members of Congress are saying. You know, again, big picture, when you step back and look at this, you see sort of the struggle between what's said publicly and what's said privately, because you can tell Republicans are concerned. You can tell it when they stop for your cameras. They're not avoiding us. They feel like they have to say something about this. But you also know that behind the scenes, they are probably joining Democrats in the idea of this is just a bridge too far for us. We can't sell this to our constituents. We're having problems back at home. This may affect us electorally. They're very clear-eyed about that, but it's behind the scenes. So it is a question of how far are they willing to go up against Trump or the White House.
One thing they are saying publicly is this is Trump's decision. This is Trump's economy. And so that can be both a bold, empowering statement for Donald Trump, or it can be a damning statement. They're sort of leaving the door open to see which way it goes.
Yeah, totally. I mean, they can distance themselves. They're expressing enough concern. They can say they didn't have anything to do with this. He did this without Congress. And what's so wild too, and we're not talking about it because the story is the Republicans right now, but this was like the Democratic thing. Tariffs were what Democrats used to run on. That's like Sherrod Brown's big issue. We need more tariffs. Frankly, what Trump has just done would be something Bernie Sanders would do if he was president. And so you have this odd situation where Democrats are all speaking out against it because Trump's doing it. But this is sort of old-fashioned Democratic blue collar, this is what, sort of union policy. And now Republicans who almost all came of age as like Reaganites and free traders and Paul Ryan acolytes. Now they have to be in this awkward position of defending essentially like Bernie Sanders's 1920s era policy.
Now, the one thing I will say Democrats are telling me is that there's no rhyme or reason to this. They just do not get the formula. They do not get the justification on which country and why and how. So it's like the tariffs, and then there's like all the fine print you have to read about sort of how this is being implemented and why. The markets are reading what they want to. They're seeing what they want to see. They're reading the tea leaves the way they want to read the tea leaves. This
is such a Donald Trump thing too. He gets away with Wall Street during the campaign, for example, overwhelmingly supporting him. Like Wall Street investors didn't think he was actually going to do this. I mean, he's been saying he was going to do this since the first term. And in the first term, he was stopped because you had people like Gary Cohn at the National Economic Council, who had been president of Goldman Sachs, and Steve Mnuchin, who had been an investment banker as Secretary of the Treasury. And so those people were sort of adults in the room who were stopping him from doing this. So Wall Street assumed he wouldn't actually do what he said. And they all heard what they wanted to hear, which was people close to Trump saying like, don't worry, it's going to be fine. He doesn't really mean it. This is a negotiating position. And then he goes out and does it. And now they're all freaking out in the markets because they didn't think Trump was going to do what he said, and he is actually doing what he campaigned on.
We mentioned conflict, and I want to get back to the conflict of what's happening in Trump's own team. Let's listen to some tape. You might recognize this voice talking about how there should just be like free trade between the U.S. and Europe. Why not? Let's listen.
I'm hopeful that there can be a very close relationship with America and Europe. And I'm hopeful, for example, with the tariffs, that at the end of the day, I hope it is agreed that both Europe and the United States should move, ideally, in my view, to a zero tariff situation, effectively creating a free trade zone between Europe and North America.
If you guessed Elon Musk, you are right. That's who that was, advocating for free trade with Europe, James?
He sounded like a globalist to me.
Well, let's listen to what his boss right now, Donald Trump, because Elon Musk is working for the federal government, running Doge, not on paper, but in all other respects. Let's listen to what Donald Trump had to say about that idea of free trade with Europe and the EU.
The EU has said that they have offered zero for zero tariffs on cars and industrial goods. Is that not enough?
Well, the EU, no, it's not. The EU has been very tough over the years. I always say it was formed to really do damage to the United States in trade.
Rhonda, totally contradictory messages, obviously, but Trump's the one making the decisions, so that's the one we have to listen to.
Yes, that's true. But I do think that this is a sign maybe to watch for more fissures between Trump and Musk, because this is a significant part, like James just said. Trump campaigned on this, on doing tariffs. This should not really take too many people by surprise because he did it in the first term and also campaigned on it. So the fact that this is, a part of what he wants to do in a second administration, and Musk is sort of saying that, I don't agree with this or we should do it differently. That does suggest that there might be, maybe trouble in paradise. I don't know. I don't know if we can read it fully that way, but it is significant that he is coming out very clearly against this idea of tariffs. I'll also say that he's in this sort of battle, at least they're posting online, with Peter Navarro, the president's trade advisor. One quote that we have in a story actually on the Post site, he posted that Navarro is truly a moron. He said that he is not equipped to have the job that he has. Navarro has punched back. So it does suggest that there is at least some palace intrigue happening inside the White House when it comes to tariffs.
There's always infighting in an administration. There's a lot going on, right? But we don't usually see people tweeting about how much they hate each other and disrespect each other, James.
Trump likes it because, I'm not sure he likes it. He doesn't like to be asked about what Elon said, but he likes that the anger of the business community, and we know from reporting, Elon is saying to Trump much more negative things privately than he's saying publicly, and he's being pretty harsh publicly. Trump likes that people are blaming Peter Navarro instead of him. Trump is the decision maker. This is Donald Trump's policy. And this is sort of like with Doge. Like, Trump was happy to have Elon be the heat shield. And was like, Elon is the person firing all these people. Trump can take credit for the good stuff. But there's this kind of funny dynamic where you talk to like MAGA true believers, and they'll say like, if only Trump knew what was happening, with Doge or with something else, and with Social Security wait times. And it's like, these are Trump's policies, and so I think Trump likes having his advisors sort of go at it. He likes this idea that he's the decider. The most striking thing Elon said, he's now attacked Navarro the last 3 days in a row. On Saturday, he wrote, quote, "He ain't built," in response to Navarro. The idea is that
one.
Peter might bleep that out, what he's saying, the world's richest man is saying, like, Peter Navarro is this Harvard academic, he got his PhD at Harvard, wouldn't be welcome at Harvard today, but he has never actually built anything. And Elon is saying, I build cars, I build things and sell them. I know how complicated the supply chains are. That was fascinating to watch. The other thing that happened that was really surprising was Bill Ackman, who's a billionaire hedge fund guy, strong Trump supporter. He started attacking the Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, yesterday on Twitter. In the morning, he says Howard Lutnick is long bonds. He owns bonds, and the value of bonds goes up when stocks go down. So Howard Lutnick is he's getting rich off of this. And then a few hours later, Ackman tweets and basically recants and apologizes. Clearly someone from the White House called and screamed at him, maybe Trump, and says, no, Lutnick is doing this because this is what the president wants, and he believes in it. So the coalition is definitely sort of feeling some pressure.
All right, you mentioned bonds. Are there any winners in what's happening right now?
People who bet on volatility. I mean, there are a lot of hedge funds that sort of hedge for ups and downs in the market. There are a lot of people who bet on volatility, which would have been a smart trade a few weeks ago. But what's so weird about this current moment is normally any economist, what they teach you in, Econ 101 in college is when there are tariffs, when you raise the wall, that actually should make the dollar go up. The dollar should be stronger as protectionism goes in place. But in fact, the dollar has fallen because hedge fund people, big players, are under the bizarre, but also understandable belief that maybe it's safer to put money in pound sterling right now, or euros, or even yen. And so money has been moving away from the dollar. The other thing you'd expect in a situation like this where the markets are falling is that gold would go up, because if you're moving your money out of stocks, you'd put it in gold. But instead, gold has gone down. What that suggests, very worryingly, is that people are getting margin calls, and that there's a lot of options, and there's various people are over leveraged. And so they're having to sell to cover their losses. And so there's a lot of funky things happening, because this is really a dramatic break. But essentially Trump has just like knocked over the financial system, and it's trying to readjust. And so
it's using its old rules, but the old rules don't really apply right now.
Weird things are happening.
I want to play a clip that's been sort of making the rounds on the internet in the last couple of days. This is Donald Trump in a History Channel documentary back from 2012. So this is before he came down the old golden escalator. I almost said it is old now, the golden escalator to become a presidential candidate. Trump talking about how he makes money off a down market. Let's listen to this.
I find that I do better in bad markets. I buy things in bad markets. And you can't do that in a great economy. You can't buy it. Either you're going to buy it very expensively or not be able to buy it at all. So there's a lot of opportunity, I find, in the bad times.
Opportunity in the bad times.
What a golden oldie.
It's a golden oldie.
Yeah, I mean, he's not wrong that there are opportunity. If you bought.
Well, if you have money, if you got stuff to play with, and you got money to swing around, you can make some risky bets. You can jump in the market when it's not doing well.
Yeah. So Warren Buffett has a lot of cash. Mm-hmm. Warren Buffett has pretty astutely recognized this was where things were headed, sold a lot of stock, and now he has money to put in, just as he frankly did in 2008. But there are a lot of people who, like what happens is, and this is our viewers want to know, our readers want to know, like, what should I do in this moment? And it's so tempting to panic sell. And that almost is never a good idea. In the long term, obviously the markets go up, but also it is very hard to buy on the dip, to know when the market hit bottom. So if you bought when COVID was happening at the depth of the market, you made huge gains. But
how did you know when the depth is there?
Exactly.
Right? You can actually lose. I'm just reading Michelle Singletary's columns as my the Washington Post financial advice columnist. So
it's like catching a falling knife, to know. And so I think there are a lot of people at home who are like, okay, what should I do in this? And the truth is,
but it's not like a layman's game. It's like a professional's game,
right?
Which Trump is sort of saying he is this businessman, back in 2012. But that's not necessarily practical. Applicable. I don't think it's going to help me in the market.
I think, I think that there are. I mean, certain things will become undervalued. Like certain companies stand to. If you make a lot of products in the United States and don't depend on foreign supply chains, maybe you'll be better off. Like if there are people who will not be hurt as much as other people.
How's crypto doing?
So crypto is falling. Crypto is really tanked more dramatically even than the stock markets. This is interesting because Trump has tried to position himself as the crypto president. We've talked about this in previous episodes. And some interesting stuff is happening. I mean, Trump is essentially changing the rules of the game.
Let's talk about that because this is very significant. We are learning, the Washington Post just reported that the Justice Department is going to focus less on cryptocurrency fraud. Now, it will still look at, James, cases of fraud for specific things, money laundering or some specific, trafficking issue or something, but not based on the cryptocurrency itself.
This is a huge deal. And it's one of many things Trump has done to sort of signal to the crypto markets that the government is going to be hands off. So this Justice Department memo says they're no longer going to bring cases under the Bank Secrecy Act or the Commodity Exchange Act. And the Justice Department during the Biden administration brought some major cases. They went after this one Bitcoin exchange that was a haven for money laundering. And all that you had to give them to trade Bitcoin was an email address. And so they didn't verify your financial information. And so it was easy for drug traffickers to just move money through human traffickers. And so the government actually arrested and prosecuted and convicted 3 leaders of this. Trump, a few Friday nights ago, pardoned those 3 people. And he has created a crypto exchange. The SEC has dropped a bunch of their crypto investigations. So you have this awkward thing where the Justice Department is saying, we're going to leave the enforcement of crypto to the financial agencies like the SEC, and the SEC is saying we're going to be more hands off. So everyone is kind of like pointing the finger at everyone else. And even though the government says this isn't an invitation to fraud, functionally it is an invitation to fraud.
What will it mean for people like Sam Bankman-Fried
So Sam Bankman-Fried is desperately lobbying for a pardon. His parents are working every angle, and they're trying to get to Trump. And frankly, if there was an exchange where you could bet on the likelihood of Sam Bankman-Fried getting pardoned, I think there's a lot of people in crypto who got really hurt by his con artistry, and so they don't want to see him. But Trump pardoned the Silk Road guy. That was one of his first moves. So I think the odds of SBF getting pardoned probably inched up today, closer to 50% than they were yesterday.
Would a case like that have been brought under the new Trump administration?
It's a great question. No, I don't think so. You can never say never, because maybe he was perceived as this big Democratic donor, and maybe they would have come up with a reason to go after him. And there's just so many different ways that crypto allows people to violate federal law, including tax evasion. If you're moving money around in crypto and it's not being disclosed to to banks and to the IRS, then you're not paying taxes on it. And so tax evasion is going to become more rampant, but Trump's also slashing the size of the IRS and reducing enforcement of the tax laws. So people might still get caught, but there's going to be far fewer people caught, and that's going to embolden people to be bolder. And if you're an investor who's like interested in crypto, you're like, your money's at risk if you are doing this, and it's a risky capital play.
Well, I'm not really sure where we go from here, guys, but I have an idea. Let's come back on Thursday.
Okay.
Talk some more. James Hohmann, Rhonda Colvin, thank you so much. I'm Libby Casey. That will do it for Sidebar this week. So much to keep talking about related to the tariffs, related to the American economy, and I really appreciate you, James, bringing us our colleagues reporting on crypto, which is fascinating. We will talk to you on Thursday. You can find us on your favorite podcast app or look for us on YouTube by finding The Washington Post. We'll see you soon.